Guys, it's almost that time. Back to school. Back to school. Old Navy is having their back to school sale. I hate being the bearer of bad news here, but summer is almost done. However, we don't need to mourn about it. It's fine. I got you covered. Let's take a look back at summer 2021, and let's talk about the movies I've seen. This will be a quick guide. If you didn't go to the cinemas during the summer because of the pandemic, don't worry, I got you. I'll tell you which movies are good and which ones to go see and which ones to avoid. I have done some reviews of summer movies on my channel. I did a review of In the Heights and Suicide Squad, so I won't be reviewing those movies today. If you want to learn more about those, just look at the previous videos on my channel. Now, before I go into the movies I've watched, I'm gonna talk about the movies I decided to skip out on, because sometimes we see movie reviews and people will review a movie, but sometimes the story behind not watching a movie is just as interesting as a review to me. So I'm gonna talk about the movies I skipped, then I'm going to talk about the movies I've seen but didn't have time to review on my channel. This is gonna be a two-part video because I've seen a lot of summer movies and I want to give each movie the light of day. So let's get started here. Movies I've skipped. First movie I skipped was Black Widow. I'm not interested in a Black Widow movie, especially after her death in Avengers Endgame. Feels a little useless to me. I do also, and I might be the only one on this, these movies are still going strong, I presume. But I have some Marvel fatigue, and superhero fatigue in general. I'm so bleh on superheroes at this point, especially post-pandemic where I was not really watching superhero movies. I probably went a year without watching superhero movies, minus Suicide Squad. Yeah, it's just, I'm done with superhero movies. It was fun while it lasted. I loved all of the Marvel movies up to Endgame. Most of the Marvel movies up to Endgame. And I like some of the DC movies, but at this point I'm just a little burnt out on comic book movies. I think what I'm gonna do is take a break, and once I'm ready to watch superhero movies again, I'm gonna watch the best ofs, the ones people are talking about. So probably Black Widow, I'll never get around to watching it. Just judging based off of feedback I've been getting. Snake Eyes, no interest in G.I. Joe. I didn't grow up on it. I'm from Canada. I feel like G.I. Joe is more of an American thing. I did watch the G.I. Joe movie with Bruce Willis in theaters, and I watched it in French because they didn't have it in English where I was. So I watched the French dubbed version of it, and it was pretty bad, but can't really judge it fairly. It was the French dubbed version. I'm skipping on Snake Eyes. I feel like it's more of an American thing, and I just never grew up with the franchise. Other movie I'm skipping out on, Respect, which is the Aretha Franklin biopic. A lot of people are liking this movie. Just like I was talking about with superhero movies, I'm a little burnt on biopics. I feel like they all have a similar structure. What I find funny is that people will knock on superhero movies for having a repetitive structure. The structure of biopics to me is equally as guilty of that. You look at a movie like Ray, the Ray Charles biopic, then Walk the Line, the Johnny Cash biopic. They have like the exact same structure. They even did a parody movie with John C. Reilly called Walk Hard that pokes fun of that repetitive structure, and they're still making biopics. And I love Aretha Franklin. I love her music. My friends make fun of me for listening to her music while I study. I'm not gonna knock on this movie. If people get to discover Aretha Franklin through this movie, much like a lot of young people discovered Queen through the Bohemian Rhapsody movie, I'm okay with that. It's just not for me. I would much rather watch a documentary. For instance, I'm a huge fan of Nirvana. I think Nirvana is a great band. I have no interest in a straightforward Nirvana biopic. I would much rather watch Kurt Cobain montage of Heck. I think that's a great documentary. So when it comes to artists I really like, unless it's something very new and creative like the Bob Dylan biopic, I thought that was really fresh, I'm gonna probably skip out on it. Don't Breathe 2 is the other movie I decided to skip out on. I love the first Don't Breathe. The first Don't Breathe is a fantastic movie. I just don't get Don't Breathe 2. If you guys haven't seen Don't Breathe 1, it's about a bunch of kids that break into a blind man's house. Well, they don't know that the blind man is actually a war veteran, and he's taking them out one by one. Cool premise for a movie. At the end of the movie, he kidnaps one of the girls, straps her to a chair, imprisons her in his cellar, and takes a turkey baster full of his own semen and threatens to impregnate her. And I have no problem with that. That was such a fucked up, twisted ending. I dug it. I thought that was really out of nowhere. I thought it was really freaky. It harkened back to those 70s horror movies that just had gross shit like that. So I dug that, but now they're doing a bit of a Terminator 2. They're taking the villain of the first movie and making him the protagonist, which I don't know how you do that in a movie like this. It works in Terminator 2 because the character you see in the first movie is not the same as the character you see in the second movie. Even though they're both played by Arnold, they have the same shell. It's a different programming inside, so you kind of get it. Don't Breathe 2 is the same character, and you're kind of just like, huh? Why are they doing this? I just watched this man kidnap a girl, take a turkey baster full of his own semen, and threaten to put it inside of her. Now you want me to root for this guy? And maybe the movie has a logical explanation to it. It just wasn't shown through the trailers, so it feels a bit stupid to me, to be honest. Other movies I haven't seen is either A, I didn't have the time or the interest, or the pandemic made it hard for me to watch the movie. I live in a pretty small town, and sometimes I'll have to drive far to go see these movies. Without further ado, let's get started. What movies have I seen? To me, the best movie of the summer is Free Guy. That sounds stupid, but I thought Free Guy was an amazing movie. For those of you who don't know, Free Guy is about a man played by Ryan Reynolds who discovers that he's an NPC in a video game and that the game is going to be shut down and he has to save all the characters in the video game before it shuts down. To me, this is the best movie of the summer. I don't know if it's the best movie of the year. There's one other movie I have in mind that I thought was better, but I told Jacky, my good friend Jacky, who helps edit these videos, I told him to go watch this movie because it's so fun and original, and he went with his friend Fevzi, and Jacky went to the theater, and they walked out, and apparently Fevzi was like, Paul said that was the best movie of the summer, and then Jacky was like, that's the best movie of the summer. I guess I'm in the minority. I thought this was a very fun, enjoyable movie. And maybe it's because I had an itch. I haven't seen an original blockbuster in a while. I'm always bitching to my friends that the 70s, they were lucky. They had Star Wars. It was such like an original blockbuster movie. And in the 90s, they had Jurassic Park and all these original blockbuster movies. And I feel like my generation kind of missed out on that. I'm just getting rehash of what the previous generation liked. This to me was the closest I've seen a movie scratch that itch. This movie was produced back in 2019, or prior to 2019 even, before Disney purchased Fox Studios. So this movie got made, and then Disney bought out the company, and now this belongs to Disney. But this was previously produced by 20th Century Fox. The story is nothing wholly original. If you've seen The Truman Show, this is basically The Truman Show, but a big blockbuster version of it. If you've seen The Lego Movie, this is basically The Lego Movie, but a big blockbuster live-action version of it. What really works here is the fact that it appeals to a broad audience, and it does attempt to tackle some themes that are very relevant to today's society. Themes of AI getting out of control. At what point does AI have consciousness, and at what point should we start sympathizing for AI? And other relevant themes to today. I'm not a big gamer, but my roommate talks to me a lot about this. He talks about corporatism in video games, how they'll do unethical things like shut down prior versions of the video game so you can be forced to play the new version and stuff like that. I feel like this was a very relevant movie. A lot of people are gonna cringe at the YouTube cameos. There's YouTubers that show up in the movie, people like Pokimane. I didn't mind that. It really fit with the movie, and it added a bit of realism. It reminded me of in zombie movies how there'll be a news report and it'll be like Anderson Cooper or some person like that, and you're just like, oh, okay, that adds a bit to the realism. It reminded me of that. It kind of worked in this movie, so I didn't find that cringe. There are some things that I found cringy in this movie, and those things are when Disney is cramming down product placement, just shoving it down your throat. Hey, product placement! There's a part that totally doesn't fit in this movie where Ryan Reynolds gets a Captain America shield and then gets a Hulk arm, and then you're like, okay, yeah, I get it, Disney bought this movie, I get it, whatever. And then that's not enough. You have to have a Star Wars reference where they're playing Star Wars music and Ryan Reynolds has a lightsaber. And I was just like, fuck, I forgot about Disney for like 2 hours of my life. You don't have to remind me of it. It's fine. I was enjoying it. I thought those Disney product placements in the movie were very annoying, and I wish someone would just release the Blu-ray version of this movie and cut out that scene. I hated that scene. It didn't fit the movie at all. There was some references to Grand Theft Auto and Fortnite, and those worked because it creates this video game world. I didn't mind that. It was really just when it went to Marvel, Disney, stuff like that, I was like, fuck that. Other than that, I usually hate love stories in a big blockbuster movie. This was a really well done love story. Like, the love story in this really worked, which I was surprised. And I thought the female character, I forget who's the actress that plays her, I thought she was very good in the movie. So overall, Free Guy, winner of the summer. I never thought I'd say it because I thought the trailers, quite frankly, didn't really sell me on the movie. But I gave it a shot anyway because it's an original blockbuster movie, and I enjoyed it very much.
I'm not going to be the good guy. I'm going to be the great guy.
Okay, well, enjoy your lifetime supply of virginity.
Second best movie I saw of the summer is The Green Knight. I really liked The Green Knight. Just goes to show how Free Guy, I enjoyed it so much. The rest of these movies I'm going to talk about for the most part are these small indie movies, but Free Guy to me was the winner of the summer. What does that say about me? Maybe I'm a mouth-breathing idiot who just likes shoving popcorn in his face. No, I'll just give you my take, and if you don't like it, you can fart on yourself. The Green Knight is basically a retelling of the medieval fantasy of Sir Gawain. It was directed by David Lowery, and it stars Dev Patel. David Lowery is a director I've kind of been on the fence about. I've loved some of his movies, like The Old Man and the Gun. However, I've disliked a few of his other movies, like A Ghost Story. A Ghost Story was just pretentious to me, and I don't like throwing that word often to movies, but there was that scene I remember in A Ghost Story where characters are at a party, and they're like getting stoned, and they're just talking about philosophy, and I was just like, this movie's lost me. The Green Knight is probably his best movie, and the trailers would have by acclaimed visionary director David Lowery, and before watching this movie I wouldn't quite call him that. To me that's a very prestigious title to give to someone, but after watching this movie I can understand, okay, this guy really is a visionary. When I first walked into this theater and when I first watched this movie, it took me a while to budge. I was sitting there with my arms crossed and I was like, what the fuck is this? I'm just waiting for the movie to take me on a ride. Once I eased up a bit, once I started relaxing, once I understood what this director is trying to do, I just detensed and let the director take me on an adventure, and it really worked. The cinematography here is beautiful. The characters are very interesting. The situations where Gawain is landing himself in, those are all pretty fantastic in this movie. And this is a genre I don't usually like. Medieval fantasy, I've never seen Game of Thrones. Lord of the Rings, I think, while a lot of people like it, it's just not really my cup of tea. But I thought The Green Knight really works. I think what I liked the most about this movie is that usually when you watch these medieval fantasy movies like a King Arthur, it's usually about heroism, bravery. This movie kind of takes a different angle. Sir Gawain, his story is a story of cowardness, and I thought that's what I thought was interesting about this movie. This movie isn't about bravery. This movie is about cowardness. I thought the story was really interesting, and once the climax of the movie happens, I really enjoyed that climax. It was very reminiscent of Martin Scorsese's Last Temptation of Christ, where I like that. I like it when characters are seeing what their life can be, and they're faced with these two paths, and they have to choose the right path. Very reoccurrent story point when it comes to these medieval fantasies. But just seeing Sir Gawain go down this dark path, this downward spiral, I thought was very entertaining. I really love this movie. This is probably going to end up on my top 10 movies of the year.
Do not waste this.
Another movie I watched that unfortunately I was not as much a fan of is called Wrath of Man. Wrath of Man is about a man played by Jason Statham who works for a cash truck company, and in typical Guy Ritchie fashion, this movie travels in time, goes from before the incident, after the incident, during the incident. For those of you who don't know Guy Ritchie, he directed movies like Snatch, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. More recently, he's done blockbuster films, the Sherlock Holmes films, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., which The Man from U.N.C.L.E. is actually a really decent movie. I enjoy that one quite a bit. And lately, he's done the Aladdin remake, which I haven't seen. I haven't seen any of the Disney live-action remakes besides Jungle Book. Guy Ritchie's last movie was The Gentleman with Matthew McConaughey, and I thought that movie was very fun. Albeit a little too reminiscent of the movie Seven Psychopaths, but I still enjoyed The Gentleman, and it was a bit of a comeback for Guy Ritchie. He kept doing these big blockbuster films, and The Gentleman was a bit more of what he would do back in the early 2000s and in the 90s with movies like Snatch. Unfortunately, I can't say the same about Wrath of Man. I thought this movie was way too brooding. It took itself way too seriously. The music, the style of it, it felt like a crappy early 2000s action movie. I can see what Guy Ritchie was trying to do. Back in the 80s and the 90s, when you had these movies that followed a group of guys like cops, or robbers, or the military, they would use a lot of foul language. They would talk to each other, they'd use homophobic slurs and stuff like that. And I feel like Guy Ritchie was sitting in a chair and was like, I want to make a movie that's like that. That is a good throwback to those kind of movies. Which I get too, because I was talking to a friend who was in the military, and he hates it in military movies when they use terms like pep squeak. It's like, that's not a term that's used in the military. They'll go for something a lot more offensive. I can see what Guy Ritchie was trying to do with this movie. Unfortunately, that's just like an inkling of an idea, and that's not something to go based on. That's not where you start your story from. It starts with the story, what happens, who are these characters, and then if the story merits it, then you can add in those elements of realism. But unfortunately, he did the other way around. He added the elements he wanted to do, and he kind of constructed a story around it. Which, I wasn't offended by the language in this movie. I just feel like that's all the movie was trying to do. The story was slow, my dad fell asleep, we were just overall bored. The music was very dull. I just remember the soundtrack being very dull, and like, it sounded like when you go on YouTube and just search like copyright free epic music or badass music on YouTube. That's what the soundtrack sounded like to me. Guy Ritchie likes traveling in time with his movies, kind of like Tarantino in Pulp Fiction. He likes showing the movies in a non-chronological way. This movie didn't merit that. It just made it more confusing, and for what? For nothing. I thought, anyway. I didn't like Wrath of Man, unfortunately. I'll still go see the next Guy Ritchie movie because he's an auteur filmmaker at this point. Some might disagree with that statement, but to me, he is an auteur filmmaker, so I'll go see whatever he makes, and if he makes a couple of shit movies in a row, then I'll probably fall off the Guy Ritchie train, but I'm not at that point yet, so it's all dandy.
And I do bear a grudge.
Last movie I'm going to talk about, this is going to be a two-part video because I don't want these to go on too long. I'll talk about the rest of the movies I saw over the summer in the second part of this video. But the other movie I saw was The Forever Purge, which, again, was not a very good movie in my opinion. The Forever Purge is basically about some guy who's trying to escape to Mexico during the Purge, and this time the twist is that the Purge is no longer 24 hours. It's gotten out of control, and now the whole country is purging 24/7, 365. As cool as that sounds, this movie was a snoozer. First of all, I went to see this movie in theaters with my friend. My friend was like, hey, I know this is gonna be shit, but let's go watch The Forever Purge. And I was like, oh, fine. So I went to see it with him. I went with my other friend, and we all three fell asleep during the movie, and I think we didn't even finish the movie. We walked out. These Purge movies are getting out of control on how just flat out lazy they are. I walked into the theater, I thought, okay, it's an R-rated movie. At least we're gonna get some cool gore. This movie can't even do that. There is barely any... I had to check the poster again to make sure it was PG-13 or R. This movie barely has any violence in it, which your whole concept is founded on the idea of violence. These are supposed to be violent movies. It's about lunatics going crazy in the street and killing each other, yet it's very tame. The Purge movies have a really cool concept, but they never capitalized on it. That's how I feel about the Purge franchise. The first Purge movie came out, and it was this really cool concept. It's like, what if Trick or Treat happened, but this Trick or Treat was like on steroids. It was this crazy Trick or Treat, which that's a good premise. And the first movie, it was low budget. It starred Ethan Hawke, and it was this very secluded one area movie, which I'm fine with, okay? Because the movie had to prove itself before becoming a franchise. The first Purge is a good lifting off point. The Purge Anarchy takes that concept and expands upon it, which I wasn't that big into the Purge Anarchy. I think that's the second movie. I wasn't that big into it, but it wasn't awful. At that point in the franchise, I felt like you can still make a pretty decent idea with this movie. And then the third one happened, and then the fourth one happened, and then the fifth one happened. It's just like, oh my god, just let it die. I hear they're making a TV show. I don't know if it's currently showing or if it's in production. I feel like a TV show would be way better. Do something like Black Mirror, where it's a different story every episode and you're expanding on this universe. These movies are just so broad and so lazy. I didn't feel anything for any of these characters. I'm gonna go into like some delicate territory. I just want to preface it by saying that I don't have a political leaning in America because I'm Canadian. I'm not really interested in American politics all that much. I'll watch it for the entertainment value, but besides that, I don't really have a dog in the fight. That said, the political messaging in this movie is so on your nose and so forced and so inorganic. It really is annoying, especially to an international viewer who doesn't give a crap about American politics. There's a scene in this movie where there's an ambulance going around, and the ambulance has like a skull painted on it, and it's saying like the sirens are going off, and there's a guy with a Trump voice saying, "We have to cleanse the earth. We got to cleanse the earth." That's not subtle political messaging, okay? The thing is, movies are always going to be a step behind the news or Reddit or more topical media, because movies take so long to make that whenever you do a joke, it's going to be a year late, regardless of what you do. So movies have to find a way to make a joke relevant, but still make it so that it doesn't get outdated. The Forever Purge has that similar problem. They threw in Trump references everywhere. Well, not everywhere. It wasn't as bad as the previous movie, but they did throw in a few. And it's just like, dude, the guy's no longer in office. I haven't heard the word Trump in quite a while, to be honest. And when this movie came, I'm like, dude, you're too late. These are jokes you would see on Reddit a year ago. Like, get over it. It was really late to the game. Was this movie pushed because of the pandemic? Perhaps. But even then, movies aren't the best medium for very topical humor, is what I'm saying. Because of the fact that it takes so long to produce, you're always going to be late to the joke when it comes to topical humor in films. I went on a little tangent there. I'm just overall not a fan of the Purge franchise anymore. It's getting lazier and lazier, and I get why they do the political references in there. Like, one of the posters of one of the Purge movies, I remember going to the theater and seeing the poster, and it was like a Trump hat written "The Purge" on it. I get why they do that, because people are going to get raged. Either 50% of the population is going to be like, "Oh, how dare they make fun of Donald Trump!" And the other 50% is going to be like, ah, it was so brave and smart how they made fun of Donald Trump. And that creates more dialogue than the movie on its own will ever do. That's how I feel about the Purge franchise. These movies are lazy and stupid and...
English! Speak! Does this translate?
Don't worry, guys. It sounds like I hated every movie that came out this summer. Part 2 is going to have some movies I actually enjoyed as well. I'm trying to mix that up here. Movies that I liked in Part 1, movies that I didn't like in Part 1, movies that I liked in Part 2, movies that I didn't like in Part 2. So stay tuned. I'm going to keep recapping the rest of the summer.